Ever feel like no matter how carefully you plan a software project, something always seems to go wrong?
Oh, absolutely. It's like there's this universal law of software development where scope creep is inevitable and miscommunication is just lurking around every corner.
Right. And you end up with this, well, this chaotic mess that throws everything off track.
Yeah, exactly. Especially when you're talking about software that has to function within a highly regulated environment like, say, the life sciences
The
industry.
stakes are just so much higher when you're dealing with things like patient data or clinical trial software.
Oh, for sure. That's why I found this deep dive into XLM solutions so fascinating.
Their approach to software development.
Yeah. They've really seemed to crack the code, so to speak, when it comes to building efficient and compliant software.
Okay, so their secret sauce, what is it?
Well, their SDLC, their software development lifecycle, is designed specifically to tackle those common development headaches head on.
We're talking about the scope creep, the communication breakdowns, all those things that can really derail a project, right?
Exactly. And what I found particularly interesting is that they don't just preach this process, they actually use it internally for their own tools as well as for client projects.
So it's not just a theoretical framework. They're actually putting it into practice themselves.
Exactly. They call it their take our own medicine approach, which I thought was pretty clever.
I like that. It shows a certain level of commitment to their own methods. So where do they even begin? Building a robust SDLC like that seems like a pretty daunting task.
Well, they lay it all out in their continuous TV weekly newsletter, specifically issue #031, and they emphasize this really structured approach right from the get-go, starting with what they call project initiation and management.
So it's not just a matter of jumping into the code and hoping for the best.
No, 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 they're big on having structured conversations with all the stakeholders right at the beginning to make sure everyone's on the same page.
So it's like laying a solid foundation before you even start building. Makes sense. But how do they actually ensure that everyone stays on the same page throughout the entire project?
Yeah.
I mean, things change, new information comes up, priorities shift.
That's where tools like Jira come in. XLM uses Jira to create a centralized hub for all project-related information and communication. So from day one, they're building out these detailed project assets within Jira, which creates this really transparent and trackable system.
So everyone involved can see the project roadmap, the timeline, who's responsible for what, all of that.
Precisely. And this meticulous documentation, it's not just for organizational purposes, it's crucial for maintaining compliance, especially in regulated industries.
Right, because you need that clear audit trail to demonstrate that every decision, every change was documented and approved.
Exactly. And speaking of change, XLM has a really rigorous change control process in place. They don't just make changes on the fly.
Which, let's be honest, can be a recipe for disaster.
Absolutely. Every proposed change has to be thoroughly documented, reviewed, and formally approved before they even think about implementing it.
So that prevents those frustrating situations where a seemingly small change snowballs into this huge issue that throws the entire project off track.
Exactly. They're really trying to get ahead of scope creep, which is a common problem in software development.
Yeah, that's always a challenge. I'm also curious about how they approach the initial scoping phase. It seems like getting that right from the start is crucial for avoiding problems down the line.
Absolutely. And XLM really emphasizes this collaborative approach to scoping, which they call the client handshake. It's not just about signing a contract and calling it a day.
So it's more of a two-way conversation, really understanding the client's needs and expectations.
Exactly. They bring all the stakeholders together, make sure everyone has a chance to voice their thoughts and concerns, and really strive to ensure a shared understanding of the project goals.
It sounds like they're putting a lot of effort into building that foundation of clear communication and shared understanding right from the outset. But how do they actually translate that into a concrete plan?
Well, XLM believes that a well-defined scope is crucial for a successful project. They take a very hands-on approach, working closely with the client to define the project requirements in detail. This involves really digging into the why behind each feature. It's not just enough to say, oh, we need this feature. They want to understand the user story.
So like, what problem does this feature actually solve? Who's going to use it? And how does it fit into the overall goals of the project?
Exactly. And they don't just rely on, lengthy documents to convey this information. They're big on using visual aids.
So like diagrams, flowcharts, maybe even some mock-ups to really help people visualize what the software is going to look like and how it'll work.
Precisely. Because sometimes a picture really is worth 1,000 words, or even 1,000 lines of code in this case.
Right. Speaking of code, how does XLM approach that actual development phase? all the planning and scoping in the world doesn't write the software itself.
True, but it does set the stage for a much smoother development process. And XLM, they're really into the agile methodology.
Okay, so they're working in those shorter sprints, right? I feel like that's become pretty standard in the software development world.
Yeah, exactly. They typically work in 2-week sprints, which allows them to break down those larger development goals into these more manageable chunks of work.
Right, so it's like running a marathon, but instead of one long race, it's a series of shorter sprints that eventually get you to the finish line.
That's a great analogy. And within each sprint, they use this really interesting system to organize their tasks, breaking them down into capabilities, epics, and stories.
Okay, so help me wrap my head around that. How do those three levels work together?
Sure, so capabilities represent those really big, high-level areas of functionality. Think of them like the main branches of a tree.
Okay, makes sense.
Then you have your epics, which are groups of related features within those capabilities. So they're like the smaller branches that stem off the main ones.
Gotcha.
And finally, you have your stories, which are the individual tasks that need to be completed to actually build those features. So those are like the leaves on the tree.
I like that analogy. It really helps to visualize how everything fits together. But no matter how well you plan or how organized you are, things can still go wrong during development, right? So how does XLM ensure that they're building things correctly and maintaining that high level of quality, especially with the added pressure of regulatory compliance?
Quality assurance is baked into every single step of their process. They don't just test at the end, they're constantly checking their work as they go.
Okay, so walk me through some of the specifics. How do they actually ensure quality throughout the development lifecycle?
Well, for starters, they have these really strict coding standards that all the developers have to follow. These standards act as like a set of guidelines that ensure the code is consistent, readable, and maintainable.
So it's not just about getting the code to work. It's about making sure it's well written and easy for others to understand, which is key for long-term maintainability and collaboration.
Exactly. They also have this really robust code review process.
Oh, you mean where other developers review each other's code for potential issues?
Yeah, exactly. And it's not just a quick glance over either. They have these detailed checklists that they go through to make sure the code adheres to those coding standards, follows best practices, and is free of any obvious bugs or vulnerabilities.
It's like having a second set of eyes, or even a third or fourth set of eyes, scrutinizing every single line of code.
Right. And even with all those eyes on the code, mistakes can still happen. So XLM is really big on automated testing.
Right, so using software to help catch potential issues early on.
Exactly. They actually write code to test their code.
So they're building the testing infrastructure right alongside the actual software itself. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's a really proactive approach.
Hmm.
And these automated tests, they're not just one-offs. They're integrated into their development workflow and run automatically whenever changes are made to the code base.
So it's like having this continuous feedback loop that's constantly checking for potential issues.
Precisely. And all of these automated tests, they generate these detailed reports that provide a really comprehensive overview of the health of the code.
And I imagine those reports are then carefully reviewed by the QA team.
You bet. The QA team pores over those reports, comparing the results to the initial requirements to make sure that everything is functioning exactly as expected. But testing is just one piece of the puzzle. It really is.
So you've got all this incredible software meticulously tested and reviewed, but then there's that crucial step of actually getting it into the hands of the people who'll be using it.
Yeah, the release process, that can be a bit of a nail biter, can it?
Especially in a regulated environment where there's even less room for error.
Right, you don't want to stumble at the finish line.
Exactly. So how does XLM handle that final hurdle?
Well, remember those automated pipelines we talked about? The ones they use for building and testing the code?
Yeah, the ones that are constantly running in the background, making sure everything's working as it should.
Precisely. Well, they've got specific pipelines dedicated to release management as well.
Okay, so it's like that final quality check before the package goes out the door.
Exactly. First, the developers create and execute what they call a development pipeline.
And that generates another round of those detailed test reports, right? Just to be extra sure everything's still running smoothly.
You got it. It's all about catching those potential issues as early as possible.
Makes sense.
But here's the really interesting part. Once the development pipeline gets the green light, the QA team steps in to create and run a separate release pipeline.
2 pipelines. Okay, I'm intrigued. What's the key difference there?
It's all about perspective. The development pipeline is like the internal inspection, making sure all the parts are working together as they should.
Gotcha.
The release pipeline is the external facing view. It's confirming that the final version of the software, the one that's actually going out to the client, meets every single specification and requirement.
No room for last-minute surprises.
Exactly.
I like it. But even with all this automation, I imagine there's still a lot of value in getting a human touch involved before it goes live.
Oh, absolutely. And XLM recognizes that.
Okay, good. Because sometimes you just can't beat that human intuition.
Right. So they build in this crucial step for client feedback at this stage. They don't just hand over the software and say, good luck.
So it becomes this collaborative process even after the core development is done.
Exactly. Any feedback the client has, whether it's a minor tweak or a major hiccup, it's all documented and addressed through this meticulously tracked incident ticket system.
So the client becomes an active participant in ensuring a smooth and successful release.
Precisely. It's about making sure the final product isn't just technically sound, but also truly meets the client's needs in practice.
Which has got to be a huge relief for the client, knowing that they're not just going to be left high and dry if something unexpected comes up.
Absolutely. And remember how we talked about XLM's dedication to documentation and organization? Well, that continues into this final handover phase as well.
So no dropping a zip file on their server and calling it a day.
No way. They create these dedicated client portals that provide secure access to everything: project documentation, test results, release notes, training materials, you name it.
So they're not just handing over a piece of software. They're handing over the keys to a well-tuned car with all the bells and whistles.
That's a great way to put it. They've really thought of everything to make this a seamless experience for their clients.
And this commitment to client satisfaction, it doesn't just end with a handover, does it?
Not at all. XLM gathers feedback on the entire process, from that initial client handshake to the final release.
And they use those insights to constantly refine their methods, always striving for improvement.
Exactly. They're not just trying to build great software, they're trying to build a great system for building software. And here's the really impressive part. They don't just expect clients to buy into this process blindly.
Right, because it's one thing to talk the talk, but it's another thing entirely to walk the walk.
Exactly. They've validated their own internal tools, the very ones they use to build and manage client software, to the same rigorous standards that they apply to everything else.
That's what I call putting your money where your mouth is.
Mm.
It shows a real commitment to their own philosophy.
Right. They built this entire ecosystem of validated and qualified tools, all designed to work seamlessly within their SDLC. And with over 30 years of experience in the life sciences industry, they really understand the critical importance of compliance, especially in those highly regulated GXP environments.
So it's not just about building software, it's about building trust. Trust in the process, trust in the tools, and ultimately trust between XLM and their clients.
Absolutely. Their SDLC is a testament to the idea that efficiency and compliance aren't mutually exclusive.
In fact, it sounds like they've managed to combine those two often competing forces into a powerful system for delivering high-quality software.
Precisely. And that's something that any company in any industry could learn a thing or two from.
I'm inclined to agree. It makes you wonder, though, could this level of meticulous planning and documentation be scaled down for smaller projects or companies without becoming overly burdensome?
That's a great question, and it's something worth pondering. Because while not every project requires the same level of rigor as, say, developing software for a clinical trial, there are certainly elements of XLM's approach that could be beneficial in a wide range of contexts. It's all about finding that balance between efficiency and thoroughness.
Well said. Finding that sweet spot is key. Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive into XLM's world of efficient and compliant software development.
It certainly has. They've clearly put a lot of thought into creating a system that works both for them and their clients.
A system that's built on a foundation of clear communication, meticulous documentation, and an unwavering commitment to quality. Lots to think about as we move forward in this ever-evolving world of software.
Absolutely. The key takeaways here are valuable no matter what kind of software you're building or what industry you're in.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Well, on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Until next time.